So, tell me, who was Ada Lovelace and Babbage?
So,
I know you've spent a whole graphic novel telling the story, but if you could tell it in 3 sentences, that would be great.
Yeah, the short version was, Babbage was a Lucasian professor of mathematics at Cambridge, so that was a position held by Stephen Hawking, brilliant mathematician. He invented this machine that he never built called the analytical engine, a sort of proto-computer. His friend was Ada Lovelace, who was the only legitimate daughter of Lord Byron, the famous poet, and she was a mathematician. And she was fascinated and obsessed with this analytical engine. So she wrote a notable paper describing what it could do and wrote some programs for it. For Babbage, this machine was for one purpose, and that was to do mathematics very fast and very accurate on very large numbers. Whereas Lovelace was, well, if you can process information, mathematical information,
Yes.
numerical information, you can also process logical information. So her example is music. You could teach the machine to compose music.
So tell me a little bit about your background. You're not a comic book creator.
No.
You were originally an animator.
Yeah.
You still are?
I still am. I do visual effects.
So what films have you been involved with?
Well, the most recent one that's out is Jungle Book.
Brilliant.
And I've done a little bit on The Lion King that's coming out. I started as a hand-drawn animator. So this was before computer animation was really a thing, 24 years ago. So I went into animation because I love to draw. And then computers really took over everything, so I had to learn.
Right.
The thing about computers is I hate them so much.
And you've written a whole graphic novel about the
I know.
invention of them.
Yeah, because I wasn't interested in Victorians or computers. It was a friend of mine, Sue Sharman, who started Ada Lovelace Day, which is this sort of online festival of women in computing. She's an old friend, and we were in the pub, and she was like, "You're a woman in technology. You should do a post for Ada Lovelace Day, my new venture." I didn't know who Ada Lovelace was, so I went to Wikipedia like anyone else, and I couldn't believe it reading that Wikipedia page. It just sounded like a comic book. Like she had this origin story.
And her origin story is that her dad was this mad romantic poet that was a kind of amorous lover, but also had this terrible temper.
He was sort of like Darth Vader. Like he's this sort of
He's more
shadowy,
sexy than Darth Vader.
He's like a sexy Darth Vader.
He's like a sexy Darth Vader.
And her mother, who was this very strict Christian, she'd actually married Byron apparently to reform him.
Wow, that was a big mistake.
Didn't work. Don't do that, kids. So her mother was very concerned that Ada would inherit this poetical tendency.
And poetical, that's like synonymous with madness
Yeah.
and immorality. And so what did they do to try and stop the poetical arising in young Ada?
Lady Byron's theory was that the opposite of poetry was mathematics. So she had her trained in mathematics and logic and the sciences from a very young age. She wasn't allowed to read fiction as a child, and she had this very, very strict, very isolated upbringing to sort of counter these presumably roiling currents of madness and poetry that were lurking underneath her. It didn't work. I mean, she did go a little mad.
That happens.
So I did this extremely brief and very, very comic booky summary of Ada Lovelace's life just to whack online, basically. I drew it in literally one evening. I think I just sat down and
Show off.
Yeah. It went sort of micro-viral, not viral, but like small viral. And everyone was writing to me saying, when's the next episode? Eventually, that got noticed by Dan Frank at Pantheon, who's kind of big time, like really big time comics. When I got the email, I was like, yeah, right.
Joke.
Yeah.
It's a cruel joke.
And it hadn't even crossed my mind in any way, but if Dan Frank tells you to do a book,
You
then,
do it.
Yeah.
Just do it. I wanted to talk about the form of the graphic novel.
Mm-hmm.
So it's split between your drawings, like a traditional comic form, and then you have these incredible footnotes.
Yeah.
Because I found myself like really in the story, and then oh no, the footnote, and it was like the comic book was the fantasy, and then I get grounded back in amazing facts, and I'd almost be torn between the two. But I was glad they were both there. But it's a really interesting reading experience.
Lovelace's paper on the analytical engine was actually written in the form of footnotes. As a woman, she couldn't write an original paper and have it published, really.
Just for like modern audiences,
Yeah.
like I think a lot of people would be so surprised at that. So a woman wasn't allowed to publish any academic papers.
It was more that it just wasn't done, and certainly not an original paper.
Okay.
But translations were a very sort of acceptable form for women to participate
Okay.
in science.
And
at
so a
this
lot of
time.
it was in footnote form.
Yeah, Lovelace, though, was... she's a very funny personality. You read her letters and she's, there's no getting around the fact that she's this quite temperamental and very egotistical and very Byronic figure. And she never kind of got her head around this idea that she wasn't supposed to do original work. This was not something that she really accepted. So she did this translation of this quite brief paper. I think it's 20 pages, the original papers. And then she added 40 or 50 pages of footnotes onto this paper. She's sort of in the footnotes taking charge and setting out this vision of this machine.
I want to talk a little bit about the Victorian era, and it's packed with famous characters. What was it about that period in time that created so many interesting people across so many different fields?
The Victorian era had a bit of a gold rush feel, because there were few new discoveries. Everyone was coming into London. There was this sudden mix of classes.
Yes.
It was a really small space. Everyone knew everybody else in the intellectual world. If you hear of a famous Victorian, they were at a dinner party with another famous Victorian on the regular. Like, it was a really small little world.
Well, you really capture that. There's the scene at Babbage's house where you have all these different characters together, and it never occurred to me that they would have been in the same room together or known each other.
Well, his famous parties, Babbage was this huge extrovert who loved throwing these big parties, and his house in Mayfair was the place, and you read about it everywhere when you do that search in Google Books. Babbage's parties, Babbage's evening parties. He didn't serve alcohol. That really stood out to me. Yeah, I know.
There's a really great bit where Queen Victoria, who you're not very kind to, she seems quite silly, when she comes in and she asks if this amazing new machine can fight crime. And I wondered whether that was a comment about people just wanting to read comics that are about superheroes that fight crime. And then he said, yeah, you know what, I'll give you a comic about superheroes that fight crime, but I'm also going to slip in some history. Was there a comment at all there about people's reading habits?
There's stuff that's fun to draw. And there's stuff that's like interesting and true, and like fighting crime. There's that thing, why didn't Batman just like put all his attention into like schools and youth clubs?
Sure, that would have been a really boring comic.
Yeah.
Yeah, him sitting at board meetings.
Exactly.
No, we want a cape and we want you throwing stuff at Joker. There's another bit though where Queen Victoria doesn't understand the machine. It's a little bit over her head. So they do a printout. All the numbers make a picture of a kitten.
Yeah.
And so then she gets it and she enjoys it. Do you ever feel that pressure, or did you feel that pressure when you were creating it, that you had to dumb it down for people and turn it into kind of cute cat?
No, because I was dumbing it down for myself.
You say that, your dumbing down is my dumbing up.
No, but literally that was all me learning stuff as I went. Like, I knew nothing. Like, nothing. Like, my ignorance about computing was total. I don't understand how computers work, like, barely.
Your boss is going to fire you.
Oh, no, that's...
What I notice is Ada Lovelace takes these very complex ideas and she makes them accessible. And I felt that you were doing that as you were creating the comic. You were taking very complex ideas and making them accessible to the reader. The
mathematics of this period was still comprehensible. It wasn't,
I understand that.
It wasn't that nutty. And the analytical engine is comprehensible. It's a physical thing. Something turns over here and it pushes a thing, and something turns over here and that pushes this thing. I actually built, a CG version to get my head around it. Suddenly I understood how a computer worked. Like
Wow.
Suddenly it became a physical series of processes that made sense.
Is it because you could model it and then walk around it? Because I think that's what the graphic novel does. I think you create something visual that we can hold on to and kind of walk around. So I was finding that my brain was able to conceive of and understand things that previously I couldn't.
It physicalizes it for the monkey brain, which is, my level.
Yeah, well, my brain's a little more monkey than most. I also wanted to ask you, so I hate it when people ask female creatives, like, what's it like to be a woman in your industry? I hate those questions. I think they're really sometimes quite offensive. But one thing I noticed in the comic is it is about a woman that's working in a male-dominated industry. And is that something that personally chimed with you?
When I went to school, I was like one or two girls in a class of 50.
Wow.
Students. It was so male, and I was so used to being the only woman in the studio animating, and especially when it became CG, computers, you really feel all this pressure. to be the representative of,
Which is crazy that you have to represent a whole gender.
It sucks, but that's, the way it is. I really related a lot to Ada's she had this burning need to prove herself, and you could really feel it. And I think, I definitely understood where that was coming from.
So Vero, the community there, have sent some questions to ask you. So these are from real people, not me.
Not like us.
No, we're not real. Dexter Washington asks, I'd be curious to know what was the hardest part of your project?
The analytical engine.
Just understanding
the analytical engine was brutal. It took me 6 months. The book was... Am I talking to...
Yeah, we can talk to Dexter. Hey, Dexter.
Hey. And the book was late by 6 months because I just couldn't let it go. When it's described in computer history books, it was always, and Babbage designed this machine and it was analogous to a modern computer and it's too complicated to explain and that's all you need to know. And it's I have to draw the machine, come on. And so 6 months solid, I spent only on the engine, which is actually I think 4 or 5 pages in the book.
It's a waste of time.
And my publisher was freaking out and I was like, nah, it's got to be right, because I had this image of all these computer scientists immediately descending on me as soon as the book was done. But as it turned out, nobody knew. I could have said any bullshit.
No, you got it right. You got it right,
Nobody
Sydney.
knew.
Next one, Iron Giant is such a classic movie.
Hey.
This is from Jeddah. Thank you for this. Sweet question. How does it feel to have been part of such a classic?
Oh, Giant was magic. That was an incredible education. That was my first film right out of college. I was incredibly lucky to work on that film. And everything I know about life and film and animation, I learned from that film. It was magical.
Wow. Who was the most challenging character to write?
Ada is definitely a challenge. Babbage is an open book. Is in his autobiography, his personality is so clear and so big, and he's Babbage writes himself. He does all his own material. But Lovelace is this extremely mercurial. She has a different personality for every day of the week, and every letter is different. So trying to kind of coalesce her
into one being.
Yeah. What also made her hard is that as a woman in this period, I never felt she was being honest about who she was in any letter at any time.
Wow.
She's always inventing some persona, and women were kept out of that ability to grow. I mean, who knows what the real female character is, in the state of nature. I mean, I think for most of history, women have been kind of clipped down into this sort of shape that's not maybe what they really are. I don't know.
Through your graphic novel, I think she really comes alive, and you give her a kind of second chance.
Oh, thanks.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
I was very inspired by it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you for talking to me, Sydney.
Oh, thanks. This was super fun.
Oh no, it's so interesting. Awesome.